Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Clover Owens. I'm with Halt the Harm Network. I'm really honored to be hosting this event today with Sandra Steingraber and Ranjana Bhandari. Halt the Harm Network is a network of leaders from around the United States, grassroots leaders, attorneys, scientists, funders, advocates. It's a leader directory, and it's a platform where we share online events and recordings and other resources. This is going to be a conversation with our guests, Sandra Steingraber and Ranjana Bhandari. Sandra Steingraber joins us from Concerned Health Professionals of New York, a program of the Science and Environmental Health Network, where she also serves as senior scientist. And Ranjana Bhandari, the founder and executive director of the frontline organization, Liveable Arlington. It is such an honor to have you both here today. So I want to just start by welcoming both of you here to this event. Thank you so much for joining us, Sandra. How are you doing today?
As you can see, it's snowing here in upstate New York.
Hi, Ranjana. Welcome.
Hello. Hello. It's a real honor for me to be here, and thanks for having me. Hi, Sandra.
Hi, Ranjana.
We met at that same event, the Sentinel Awards, all those years ago when I met Ryan.
It's great to share some space again today. So to get things started, I just want to invite you, and we'll have a moment to talk a little bit about the work that each of you is doing. I want to start by asking you, Sandra, to share about the Compendium for anybody who's just learning about it as they enter, or people who know about it who want to know about the 9th edition. Can you take a moment and give us the update?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Steingraber. I'm a PhD biologist. I live in upstate New York, and I serve as a senior scientist for the Science and Environmental Health Network. And as part of that organization, Concerned Health Professionals of New York, of which I'm a co-founder along with Carmi Orenstein, that project got kind of pulled in as a special program to Science and Environmental Health Network. So speaking as now as a co-founder of Concerned Health Professionals of New York, we got our start when we fought fracking here in New York State 10 years ago or so. And at that time, our governor was trying to make a decision whether to permit or prohibit fracking. And he claimed that the decision was going to be made on the results of scientific study that looked at the impacts of fracking on public health. So he put his scientists to work doing such a review of the data. We didn't know how it was scoped. There wasn't any opportunity for public input. It was being done very secretively within the Department of Health. And so a group of us, New York-based scientists and health professionals who are independent of our state government, joined together in a kind of an alliance. We called ourselves Concerned Health Professionals of New York, and we began our own independent evaluation of the data. At that time, and this is like 2012 or so, there were exactly 65 studies in the peer-reviewed literature on the potential health harms and climate risks of fracking. So we compiled those into our very first compendium. And then we did a couple things. We sent it to the governor and all the agencies. We testified before our legislators and let our elected officials know what we were seeing in the data. But also we took the data to the people. We began a kind of tour of upstate New York, especially in the frontline communities where fracking was going to come first, and presented our findings in these kind of PowerPoint presentations in church basements and libraries and junior high school auditoriums. And what we began to notice was that the more we scientists and physicians explained the health harms, what would happen to what we knew about drinking water, what we knew about air pollution, radiation, earthquakes, the more we began to turn public opinion against fracking. And so at the same time, there was a large social movement. New York is Against Fracking combined all these anti-fracking grassroots groups into a statewide coalition. And so we then kind of, as that movement gained power, we became kind of the scientists in residence to that movement. Meanwhile, the data itself was just coming in like a fire hose. So soon we had 150 studies and then 400 studies in the peer-reviewed literature. So we had a third edition of the compendium when it hit 400 studies. And it was on that basis, that was the point at which in December 2014, our governor did ban fracking. And in the C-SPAN announcement of that ban, we heard from our Department of Health commissioner who basically quoted our own words back to us. Essentially, his group of scientists reached the same conclusion that we did as independent science outside the government, concluding that fracking was unsafe for public health and couldn't be made safe through any known regulatory framework, and therefore it shouldn't happen in the state of New York. And so after we banned fracking in New York, our compendium, which had then grown to 400 studies and can no longer be stapled to the top, began to be used in other fights against fracking in other states in the United States, and also in places like South Africa, Mexico, Argentina, Ireland, Scotland, and so on. And so it was translated into Spanish, and I traveled around presenting the findings from it in all kinds of different places. And fast forward to the present moment, now we have just released the 9th edition. So this is the compendium with 9 lives. It is now more than 600 pages long and has more than 2,500 footnotes. There are way more than 2,000 studies now in the peer-reviewed literature. So it's really become an encyclopedia. And we have continued not only to update the findings, but expand the chapters that we expand our scope. So we at first started off simply by looking at the act of fracking and what it meant for the communities who lived near the fracking wells. And that's still the fundamental part of the compendium that lots of organizations make use of, including Liveable Arlington, who we're going to hear from today. But also we expanded it to include the rest of the fracking infrastructure, including sand mining. Silica sand is mined for use in fracking operations. And so that has its own separate health harms to those communities where the mining happens. We include gas storage, flare stacks, compressor stations, pipelines, gas-fired power plants, LNG terminals. And most recently with this 9th edition, we have a new chapter on gas stoves and other gas appliances in people's homes, because we see gas-fired appliances inside the homes as the terminus of the fracking pipeline. So essentially, gas begins in a pipe in a well, and then there's a continuous pipeline that goes all the way to your basement where your furnace kicks on, or your kitchen where your gas stove is located, and the combustion byproducts of gas-fired appliances creates lots of their own health effects in the form of air pollutants. And so that, for the first time, is also now part of the fracking compendium. And so we're very pleased that it continues to inform good activism against fracking in all its manifestations. And I just want to say, as a scientist, that I'm, over the last 10 years, well aware that science all by itself does not have the power to make change. It would be great if our regulatory system and our government listened to the findings of science and took a look at, oh my God, we're destabilizing the climate and pretty soon agriculture won't even be possible, and then acted on the basis of those findings. But that is, it turns out, not how it's working. And so what we need is powerful, organized citizen movements that compel that change. And so we can inform those movements with good science that these groups can then use to write letters to the editor, to stand up and make presentations, give public testimony, talk to their own faith communities, and so on. So I see the compendium not as a useful thing, as a big encyclopedia just sitting on a shelf, but its usefulness is in the way it's intended as science for the people. It's not copyrighted. It's available as an open access, fully peer-reviewed piece of science that's translated into plain spoken English. And then they're just there for you all to use in your own campaigns. So I'm very happy when activism and science can kind of dance together, and I'm happy to be one partner in that dance. So back to you, Ryan.
Thank you so much, Sandra, for that background. And I I'm now going to introduce Ranjana to come and share a little bit about the work that you're doing.
Thanks, Ryan. That's a hard act to follow, but I'll do my best. So I live in Arlington, Texas, which is a city of about 400,000 people on top of a very large reservoir of natural gas called the Barnett Shale. And we are in the DFW Metroplex, Dallas-Fort Worth. And that means there are about almost 8 million people who live here. So a little bit about my history with all of this. It started in 2006 when fracking, first arrived in our community, and they signed up all of, the entire community to agree to drilling. And there was a real void, like Sandra said, in research about fracking at that time. So I was a stay-at-home mother. I had a background in education and academia, and I thought, why don't I find a little more before we make a decision? And I found no research except one reference to benzene. I had a young son at the time, and I knew that benzene was, a carcinogen linked to childhood cancer. And so I thought this could be a terrible thing for our entire community. And we decided that as a family, we would not sign up for fracking. And that led to a very long battle with Chesapeake Energy and the state of Texas. And that's how I got my education and how the world works here where I live. We are ruled by oil and gas. So a few years went by, we lost our battle, and fracking began here. And in a few years, this city was completely overrun with frack sites. We have 99 square miles in Arlington. Very quickly, there were 56 drill sites that were built here. There were gas gathering lines everywhere for years. Anywhere, any place you went, you would see all the sidewalks dug up while they were putting gas gathering lines. 3 major compressor stations were put in. And very quickly, the character of this place changed. We had very strict zoning, and our city government just upended the zoning every time frackers wanted to put something here. I was still a little bit in disbelief, and I was naive, and I thought somebody would come and save us. I thought for sure, at that point, we started to understand that this wasn't just harmful to the people who had to live next to it, that it was terrible for the global climate. So I thought for sure somebody would intervene, and nobody did for whatever reason. And so eventually, almost to the day 9 years ago, I decided that we should start an organization. That's how Liveable Arlington came to be. We'll very soon be finishing our 9th year. And what I want to add here is, I came into this thinking that as new information was coming in, new research was being done, our job at Liveable Arlington would just be to go out and spread all this new information, because I thought when people know better, they would do better, that good information would lead to good policy, and just all this research that had started to come out about the harms of living next to fracking would have an impact on local decision-making. I was wrong. As Sandra said, there's a lot of groundwork you have to do. And just a couple of key facts since then. Our county, Tarrant County, is a large urban county. 2.1 million people live here. Now 1 million of us live less than half a mile from fracking. 30,000 school children in Arlington attend public schools less than half a mile from fracking. There are 8 daycares in that same half-mile radius. About 8,000 babies and toddlers attend daycare, literally next to Total Energy's frack sites. And we have the highest rate of birth defects now of any similar county in Texas. When all this started, we already had a high rate of childhood asthma. Now 1 in 5 children in our county have asthma. And so there's all this data, there's all this science linking these health issues to fracking, but it is a very strong, it's an uphill battle to get it to inform policy. And I must say that between 2018 and 2023, this summer, we were organized enough and were able to use all this scientific research to have an influence on our city council, but more importantly, to mobilize people, and no new fracking permits were issued by the city. But that's all changed now. The city has, they understand the power of activism, the power of science, the power of public forums where people can come and point to it. So they've found a workaround. In some sense, we are a victim of Liveable Arlington's success, and now fracking permits are issued behind closed doors. And so currently, Total Energies is fracking 27 gas wells here at 3 different sites, next to daycares, less than 350 feet from people's homes, and things are really, really bad. And maybe I'll stop here. I have some thoughts about why this is happening, but maybe later. So this was the last fracking permit issued to Total by the City Council in 2018. It was right next to a daycare. We got a denial, but something happened behind the scenes and Total was able to come back and get the permit. But as a result of this, as a result of our advocacy and often using, all the new scientific research about how this harmed people, we were able to get our ordinance upgraded in significant ways that deceptively looked small. After that, it became really difficult for City Council to issue fracking permits until 2023. So that's that site. Yeah, it's called Cornerstone. This is the Brooder site in Arlington. The closest home is about 324, or I believe, something like that, a little over 300 feet from the actual wells. And this was an existing site, but no new wells had been added in about 10 years. And this past year, the city administratively approved 17 gas wells there. They completely bypassed the community. They bypassed Liveable's ability to mobilize the community because it's not a good look when people come and talk about asthma and birth defects and poor birth outcomes and cardiac disease and increased hospitalizations from asthma, all the material that we can look up in the compendium, and plead with their government to not add any more gas wells. So unfortunately, this is happening and things are really bad here.
And Carmi shared your link in the chat as well, so everyone can go and look at more resources and information as well about Liveable Arlington.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So about the compendium, it would be really interesting. One of the topics that we are talking about today is ways to use the compendium in our local fights around the world. And we have a pretty international audience. Just looking at the Zoom chat, the people that are saying hi. We have folks in South Africa, we have someone in Colombia, and perhaps other countries as well mentioned here. So Sandra, would you tell us a little bit about how the compendium is being received internationally and just throughout your work?
Sure. So from the beginning, the compendium exists in kind of a reciprocity with activists around the world who tell us what topics that they're concerned about. And so I see science as a public servant. And so the people who live in frontline communities who are being harmed have questions, and we in Concerned Health Professionals of New York use our compendium as a way to answer those questions because we are privileged enough to have access to major university libraries. Carmi Orenstein is working always at the Cornell Library. I'm working at the college library where I used to be on faculty. And so we can pull out of the kind of obscurity of the peer-reviewed scientific literature that's expensive and requires subscriptions to get access to all the information on things that people want to know about, and then translate that into plain English and organize it along topic lines. And so at some point we heard from our brothers and sisters in Wisconsin where frac sand mining was taking place, silica sandstone was being pulverized to make frac sand. And almost overnight, sand became Wisconsin's #1 export commodity, and it was heading to fracking fields in Pennsylvania and also where Ranjana lives in Texas. And so we know that silica dust has a long history in the occupational health literature of causing lung cancer and silicosis in workers. And so then we began to be concerned about what it meant for communities where 4-year-olds and pregnant women and older people were being exposed. And it turns out there's not a lot in the literature about that, because the only people that's ever been exposed to silica dust before tend to be workers who are using, who are working in the with cement or grinding industry. So there's not a lot of information on 4-year-olds and silica dust. So we went to work trying to piece together what was available. So that's just kind of one little example. And then more recently, we had lots and lots of questions about gas stoves. And so we went to work looking at that literature. And that in contrast to the silica sand literature and 4-year-olds, it turns out we have a lot of information going back to the 1970s on the increased risk of asthma in 4-year-olds and all kinds of other young children when there's a gas stove present in the homes. And so the literature there is very robust. And yet it had been it's not well known by people who feel kind of emotionally attached to their gas stoves. And so we responded to public interest in that topic by opening this new chapter. So the compendium exists as an open source document on our website, Concerned Health Professionals New York. So it's concernedhealthny.org. But also you can, when I want to look at the fracking compendium, I just Google fracking compendium and it pops right up. That seems to be the easiest way to access it. It's a fully searchable document. So, it's this 637-page beast, but you can search for keywords. So if you're really interested in what's happening, let's say in South Africa, you can Google that. If you're interested in everything we know about flare stacks, no matter where the flare stacks are located, you can not Google it, but use the find search to search the document for the literature on that. And then also, just to make things easier, we have organized all the information into 16 chapters. So there's one on air pollution, water pollution, earthquakes, radiation exposure, health effects, worker safety, health issues, and so on. And then at the beginning, there's this 100-page, what we call front matter, which is an attempt to look across the topic areas and see patterns within the patterns. And as part of that, we also include an annotated list of all the fracking bans and moratoria around the world. And we include a section on the sort of economic and political context of fracking. And that's the section, for example, where you can see what happened with LNG imports and exports after Russia's invasion of the Ukraine in February 2022. And so we attempt to understand the economic fundamentals of the oil and gas industry. What are the forces, the sort of economic and political forces that are pushing it forward, and where things are now being impeded? Like fracking right now has a labor problem. Fracking is running out of sites to drill. And so those are causing fracking to become more expensive and slowing things down. But then there are other forces like the addition of carbon capture and storage, which is acting as a subsidy for fracking, using public money to further entrench fracking. And we take a look at not only the health harms of carbon capture pipelines and the carbon capture machinery in the communities where it's located, which is problematic, but we also look at the underlying economics of carbon capture and storage and the ways it's helping to serve as a kind of a forward motion to pull fracking along and make it profitable in places where without that subsidy, it wouldn't be profitable and able to continue. We also look at oil and gas as and its contribution to inflation. Oil and gas have become inherently an inflationary commodity because it's becoming ever more expensive to frack it out of the ground. So fracking itself is changing, and now we have these monster fracks. We look at the trends on how much water is required per well, and that just keeps going up. And in arid regions like Texas, of course, that really matters because fracking makes water completely disappear from the hydrologic cycle. So all of those kind of big trends are in this 100-page front matter, and then it's followed by 500 pages of summary of individual topics that are organized in reverse chronological order, so you can see the most recent research first, and then of course each of those topic areas we try to summarize where we see, you know, the evidence for earthquakes, for example. Like we started off thinking it was just the disposal of fracking waste that was triggering earthquakes. The more recent data shows that, oh, look, it's fracking itself that's causing some of these earthquakes. And then even more recent data looks at the carbon, the burial of the captured carbon and the use of carbon dioxide in fracking wells and enhancing oil recovery is also contributing to earthquakes. So our knowledge about what parts of fracking cause earthquakes keeps expanding. And so we trace that trend to the earthquake section. So I hope that just kind of gives you a little flavor of our process and how the data are organized in this 637-page document.
Thank you so much. And I added a few items in the chat as well, just a couple notes on things that you were mentioning. There we go. I was having a problem with my video here. Yeah, so if anybody has questions about using the compendium, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can make sure to address them as well. And Ranjana, I wanted to see if you had any response to what Sandra just shared and ways that you've been able to reference the compendium in your work as well.
Yes, and thanks, Ryan. So I want to say, yes, we have found this to be a very useful resource. And I also want to say that Sandra has been to Arlington to speak to us about, speak to the community about the research and what the harms it points to. And she actually did go around Arlington and take our drilling tour as well. So I think she has a good sense of what it is frontline extraction communities live with. Having said that, I also want to say that, you know, this is the foundation of our advocacy. Why do we not want fracking? Why don't we want our children growing up next to it? So it is very, very useful. And for politicians who are inclined to do the right thing, which is a rare breed where I live, I think, you know, it gives them, it doesn't just give the community an advocacy tool, it gives them cover. You know, they can say, look, you know, I would love to frack because I see the economics of it. I see the powerful interests allied with it, but I also then have to represent the interest of my constituents. So in many ways, it could give them cover as well if they so chose. And some have and some have not. I also want to say that there have been times when we were fighting a gas well permit and I just emailed Sandra and Carmi and I said, well, give me the best synopsis of what applies to our situation here. And they have, and I'm very grateful. In fact, in the last hearing, I think I asked Carmi to submit pages 50 through, I forget how many of the last edition into the record, and she did. So in all those ways, it's useful, but I want to talk a little bit about political realities. You know, this war has given a lifeline to industry. They're trying to use it to lock in demand for their product for the next 30 years by making these huge investments in LNG exports, LNG import terminals, and everything is changing here because of it. And, you know, there are localities, I mean, there are countries in Europe that are sitting on very large deposits of shale. They used the science as it became available, as it was publicized by the Compendium, and they used it to secure a fracking ban for themselves. However, you know, I didn't get a chance to say this. There are so many layers of inequity where we live. Even the harms of fracking are not fairly distributed, right? Communities of color suffer more, renters suffer more. You know, I mentioned 30,000 children go to public school next to fracking in Arlington. 85% of those children are children of color. There is now another layer of inequity. You know, there is science, people who have informed policy with science, and then there's science denial. And I know the science denial happens because they know that the truth hurts them. So there's this whole propaganda machine, and it's a very powerful machine. And the city council that we have now, the mayor we have now, they are completely devotees of this science denial. The best thing they can say is, well, they don't understand 5% confidence intervals. Unless you prove 100% harm, the science is bogus, things like that. So I know that they're fighting science with untruth because they know that the science points to a completely different direction of doing things and a different kind of decision making. However, I think, we are worse off in some sense. France has a fracking ban. Germany has a fracking ban. There's so much more fracking now to ship the gas there. And so it's really, really important for us to push harder and to bring some fairness where the same information set is being used to make policy across the board. Otherwise, we are paying an even higher price in some sense because the propaganda machine, the oil and gas propaganda machine, and of course it's backed with money, and it can do a lot for politicians. So, just more work for us to do to make it harder. I mean, that, harder for propaganda to sort of rule the airwaves, what people know, what people believe. And in some sense, it's the fight going on nationwide. I mean, it's in some sense, it's the fight for truth. It's the fight for our democracy. And it's really important to have vetted good science to be able to fight the propaganda. But it's a tough battle. It's a really tough battle right now because there's so much money that is riding on, hey, why don't we use the war to lock in demand for fracked gas? And, when what the money should be invested in clean energy. So that's where we are here. Somebody said it's a French company that fracks in Arlington. Thanks, Carmi. Yes, the biggest fracking company here is Total Energy, which is a French company. And we have 52 drill sites, I said. They own 38 of them. And they are the only company expanding here because they're the company with the export contracts. They're the largest exporter of LNG from the US now. And so, yeah, they are the only ones expanding in Arlington.
Sandra, do you have any comments on the tension between science and science denialism and how it plays out in communities that are using science to stand up for their health?
Well, disinformation is one of the biggest problems I think we face, and one of the consequences of disinformation has been to degrade science and kind of knock it off of its perch of things that we universally respect regardless of political opinion. So yeah, there are whole groups of people who simply don't care what the science says, and there's a kind of very concerted disinformation campaign, not only about the climate crisis but about all kinds of different things. And I did some work together with Greenpeace and Orion magazine on where this disinformation comes from, and it's a kind of international phenomenon, and some of the same kind of chaos actors who are creating this disinformation about fracking, about climate more generally, are also creating disinformation about transgendered individuals, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, Israel, Palestine. And so there are these chaos agents that are just out there kind of fomenting things, and public and social media is a place that they use that. So it's very tricky. And in all this, we really try for the Compendium to be this kind of beacon of truth and enlightenment. And I do want to say that the Compendium, in the way it serves the environmental justice community doesn't just exist as this big encyclopedia. We also have broken out parts of it to be a real full service toolkit for folks. So with each edition of the compendium that we release, we also release a series of infographics that summarize the main findings in visual terms and in very short bulleted forms. And so there are always about a set of 30 of these. We call them memes, and they're all posted on my Facebook page, which doubles as the Facebook page for Concerned Health Professionals of New York. So, but if you find my Facebook page, Sandra Steingraber, you will see that we are rolling these memes out every couple of days. And over the next couple of months, there will be a set of 30 or 31 of these infographics that I also tweet them out. So they're available across multiple platforms, but the Facebook ones come with captions, and the captions I write myself, and they are summations of the trends that we're seeing. And I intend to, when I write them, to serve as a script for any kind of public presentation you might want to give. So at the end of the next couple of months, we'll have a complete set of these infographics that will also have captions that, if you put them all together, could be used in a PowerPoint presentation that you might want to give. If you're a physician, you could do grand rounds with it. If you're a member of faith community, you could give a PowerPoint presentation to your congregation at the coffee hour. Teachers and educators can use it, and so on. And so we really intend the compendium not just to be an encyclopedia that you can mine for your own for your own internal writings. You know, you can take it and post it on your website, whatever you need. But also these visuals that we create, like, you know, fracking is bad prenatal care, and then we have a lot of all the evidence about the ways fracking harms pregnancy and produces bad pregnancy outcomes. That's all just available to you too in a even more kind of conversational way that you can use in your own work. So and we love to hear from you. So put it in the chat, ask questions, like any other ways that we can serve this data up that would help you in the local campaigns that you're all fighting. We're really interested in knowing. In other words, this compendium is a reciprocal project. we really do believe in science for the people, and that science is a public servant. So the questions that we go out and do research for are the questions that people in frontline communities come ask us about. So we are at your service.
You know, I want to say, Sandra, I think I'll print the entire hundreds of pages and take it to a hearing and read it.
It's useful. It looks like this.
Submit it into the record, because yeah.
It's a PDF file on the website, so it's easy to do. Just take the whole PDF and send it to your copy shop, and you can make yourself a paper copy.
Yeah, I think I might need to do that.
Thank you.
Again, there's absolutely no copyright or anything on this. It's all public access stuff. I mean, of course, we appreciate you acknowledging where it comes from, but if you want to do a one-pager on, I don't know, like compressor stations and benzene, you can just take what we've written and, you know, copy paste it, brand it with your own campaign logo, and use it for your own purposes.
One thing that I heard in what you just said is that the part of the compendium is being able to access all of this science, and then part of our task is to make it, you know, the messaging, like get the message out there. So you're producing these memes. There's ways for us in our local fights to use the compendium to have much easier and more convenient and organized access to the science and the studies and things like that. And then it's still up to us to figure out ways to communicate clearly and stand up to some of these chaos agents and all of the misinformation that's going to make this confusing for people. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. And I just want to say also that tip about searching for keywords is really, really helpful. I do a lot of tech support work, and those little barriers can stop people from getting what they need. So I just want everyone to remember that, you know, you have this big document, just understanding a basic search function, you know, typing in the, you know, a location, or typing in benzene, or typing in a specific concern, and being able to find certain elements of it is really, really helpful.
I guess another thing I want to mention that I'm a big believer in all my work as a science educator is that people are more likely to accept the science if they kind of understand and can visualize how it works. And so I have spent time in my summation of the evidence, not only stating what the results of this particular study was, but then I'll do background research so that I can also include in that summary statement how and why this happened. So just to give an example, in our new work on gas stoves, there's just so much evidence now about the levels of nitrogen dioxide that end up in your indoor air as the result of using gas stoves. Nitrogen dioxide is known to be linked to asthma. There's no doubt about it. It's absolutely proven cause of asthma, also strokes and heart attacks. And so, I can state all that, but I also found it useful by researching the backstory of all that to also explain to folks that nitrogen dioxide is not a combustion byproduct per se of burning gas, but rather it's because the gas flame is so hot that inevitably the air around the flame is burnt, so that nitrogen in the air and oxygen in the air are forced to combine. And it's not created by methane burning, it's created by the heat of the flame touching your indoor air that's making nitrogen and oxygen in the air combined. And nitrogen dioxide is not very water soluble. And I needed to explain that to folks because when you breathe it in, if something isn't water soluble, your whole nasal passages are kind of set up to capture things that are water soluble so they don't get into your lungs. But that whole mechanism doesn't work. And so CO2 or NO2 goes straight down into the alveoli of your lungs, where it converts to nitric acid. Nitric acid has the power to knock out the immune cells that live deep inside your lung, which is why breathing in nitrogen dioxide in your indoor airspace leads to more respiratory infections, more pneumonia, and may well increase the chances of developing COVID, for example. But also that nitric acid is inflammatory and causes an inflammatory response that leads to asthma, both more severe asthma attacks, and actually can cause the kind of spasticity that's associated in airwaves that's associated with asthma. So I find that explaining exactly how these air pollutants cause the health effects and how they're formed at the flame, it makes people feel smart. Makes people think, oh, I can understand that. I can read science and get it. And then they want to become kind of apostles for this message and go out and explain to other people, like, that gas stove in your kitchen can cause asthma in your kids, and here's why and how. And so I like to make sure that people have the full picture, not just see the statistical associations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. We have some questions in the chat that we can address before we wrap up today. And I also want to remind folks, we're going to be adding some links in the chat as well. Carmi's been adding some links already, but one of the links is specifically about using the compendium as a grassroots toolkit. So thank you so much for that link. I also, let's just jump right into one of the questions. One of the first questions that came in referenced a situation in West Virginia. So this is from Sandra Fallon, and a fracking wastewater treatment operation that went out of business in 2017. Some folks here might have heard of that. The site uncovered holding ponds with hazardous materials along with radioactivity throughout the site. So local residents are working to get it secured, and also tracking down teens and other members of the community who use the site as a party spot, likely were exposed to the hazardous waste there. The question was, have other locations dealt with this issue? How do they handle things? And would the compendium have info regarding exposure to materials from abandoned fracking wastewater sites?
Yeah, I'll answer the second question first. We absolutely do. And the where fracking wastewater ends up is a huge topic in the compendium, and it exists across several topic areas, several chapters, because fracking waste is can be stored in above ground pits, especially in California. It can be dumped into rivers and water treatment plants. That's happened in Pennsylvania, and then it's often injected into fracking waste wells, as happens in Texas. And so because it has many possible destinations, it exists across several chapters, but then in the front matter, we pull it all together. And again, this is an example of how we use the front matter to kind of look at patterns across our chapters. So now we're just looking at fracking wastewater and all the hazards in it, and all kinds of examples of how communities have confronted this waste and how they've acted. That's all in the front matter. And I know exactly the West Virginia story that you're talking about, where teenagers were partying there. I believe Justin Nobel reported it out. And so that's, you'll find that in the front matter, along with a lot of other communities that have dealt with all of it. And then radiation is a separate chapter. And so because radiation both comes out of the stack, there are radioactive particles, and especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area near where Ranjana lives, we have data showing that radioactive particles can drift downwind, and Dallas-Fort Worth is downwind of a whole bunch of them. And so the inhalation of radioactive particles that are emitted from fracking sites is a big issue for that community. But radiation is also, it turns out, it tends to collect, especially radium, tends to collect where there's a lot of scaling. Scaling is the stuff that builds up in the bottom of your teapot. It's mineral deposits. And so a lot of radium kind of travels where like calcium would go. So in the fracking equipment that workers are exposed to, radioactivity is especially high where there's a lot of scaling waste products. So that's kind of new data. And so that's, again, that's a topic that's for worker safety and health. So we make mention of it in there, but it's also has to do with the radiation chapter. And so you can see why having chapters help organize the material, but also a topic like fracking wastewater can kind of end up being atomized across many, many chapters, because it's radioactive and it causes earthquakes and it does a lot of different things. And so that's why we have this front matter where we look across the topic areas and then just look at wastewater and the myriad problems it can create. So if you're interested in understanding how other communities have confronted the problem of toxic wastewater, you're going to want to do a big find search of the document, because you're going to find relevant pieces of that story across many chapters of the compendium.
So I want to add, we confronted an injection well that was planned for our community a few years ago, right next to our drinking water source, Lake Arlington. And I found one ProPublica story, which really helped me. It's called, figure out what was wrong and how to convey it. So it's great to have more resources now to do that. And the other thing I want to say is, we started at Liveable because we were just a bunch of parents who were very concerned about children's health. So a lot of our advocacy is about how does this impact our children? Because that should be for a politician, appealing to a politician, the absolute low-hanging fruit. Don't poison children. And there is a lot of good information, about just birth outcomes and low birth weight and congenital heart disease and childhood asthma and things like that. And so a lot of times those are the parts we use the most to make our case, because to me, it would think you have to be, I don't know, just a really bad politician to ignore children's health. And apparently there are so many of them where I live.
There are so many of them wherever people live. And, the more politicians worry about controlling women's access to abortion, the more they don't care about prenatal health created by problems like fracking. So it's up to us to message that, right? Which is, and I'm willing, as somebody who sits on very strongly on one side of the reproductive justice argument, I'm very willing to sit down and talk to communities where the sanctity of prenatal life is paramount to them, to talk about the way fracking is a desecration of pregnancy, that it ruins the health of babies before birth. So we can have that conversation.
I want to thank both of
Absolutely.
you. Oh, go ahead, Ranjana.
No, that is such a contradiction where I live as well. And it really helps to have the science to say, but what about the other ways in which, pregnancy is being harmed, a developing fetus is being harmed? Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that people who are in frontline communities who are starting to organize in their community will feel less alone when they read the compendium, because it's almost certainly not just your community who's experiencing these things. So, we see fracking linked to childhood cancer in Pennsylvania, where the latest 2023 studies show an increased risk of 5 to 7-fold chance of lymphoma among children who live a couple miles from a well site. And then we see links to leukemia in kids in Pennsylvania, but we also see it in Colorado, right? And so when, and then the problems with preterm birth and small for birth, babies being born too small, we have corroborating data in Pennsylvania, from Texas, from California, from Colorado, and we see that the problems are worse among non-white communities who tend to live closer to the wellheads than white communities. So it's an environmental justice issue. So I hope that when people start reading around in the compendium, they feel less alone. And I say that, I think that's important. And I say that as a cancer survivor myself. I think a lot of people know that my own decision to become a public health ecologist started with my own cancer diagnosis and the very toxic community I grew up in, and the discovery that I was my own situation, which made me feel very alienated because I had sort of an old man's cancer as this young 20-year-old woman. And then I discovered there was a cancer cluster in my community, and I was just one data point in a whole cluster of cancers there. And in fact, that same kind of cancer cluster was replicated across the nation whenever these kind of chemicals are found in people's drinking water. So suddenly it wasn't just this terrible tragedy that happened to me as a 20-year-old, that I was connected to a much larger human rights violation that was happening in communities across the nation. And there was ways that we could organize and think about how we were connected to our drinking water and do something about it. And so I think with fracking, it's easy to feel overpowered and intimidated by these oil and gas companies who always ride into communities acting as though you have no say in this. They're wearing the mantle of inevitability, and it feels impossible to sort of fight them. But it is a David and Goliath fight, but we're David. And I've said, I'm sure some of you heard me say this before, we need to figure out how to build a slingshot. And that what the ingredients of your slingshot are kind of specific to the culture you live in, to the people around you, and to the kinds of fracking that you're fighting. So in some communities, knowing how to stop a pipeline permit is going to be the Achilles heel. That's going to be your slingshot. In another community, it's something else, right? Like we're helping people in Iowa stand up against carbon capture and storage, which is one part of the whole story of fracking, and their dependency on sort of seizing land by eminent domain was a kind of leverage point that really resonated with rural farmers, and the fact that you're compacting soil and destroying farmland to build these pipelines. So every community is going to have kind of their own kryptonite to use against the oil and gas industry. It's going to be different for wherever you are. If you live in an arid place and water is being destroyed, that's very different than what it means here, where we have lots of water, right? But I think what we all have in common is to realize that whatever the specifics that you use to fight the industry, and hopefully you'll find some tools in the compendium and all of the tools that we provide, but it basically comes down to 3 elements. It's building grassroots political power. It's love, because love's what keeps us going. And then it's science. And so you need some combination of all 3 of those to have a winning campaign. And the fact that we did use the compendium as one of our ingredients of our campaign in successfully banning fracking in New York, I think is, I hope that feels hopeful to people, that you can create your own campaign. But you're doing it together with all these other communities who all together. So it makes us feel less overpowered when we know that this is a big collective project that's going on.
Thank you so much, Sandra and Ranjana, for coming on today to discuss the compendium and share more about your work. This was such a great event. So many people were sharing in the chat their appreciation. So we are going to save this recording and share it out after, as well as some of the other links that were shared in the chat. I want to make an announcement, which I just posted, which is that at Halt the Harm Network, there's a group of us media folks who put together an online course on PFAS and fracking. And we also do campaign support. So we actually work with grassroots leaders to create media and messaging around science. So if you feel like technical stuff or like website stuff is a barrier, please reach out. That's a really big part of what we do, is try to remove those technical barriers to your campaign work. So I put details in the chat for everyone. I think it's really on topic. And then, finally, the Sentinel Awards coming up. Just want to give a shout out to upcoming events like this one that are happening in the network. So there's a virtual Sentinel Awards event where you can catch the live stream and also share your appreciation with the awardees. We'll be taking messages from the chat and compiling them to actually show on screen during the event, and really connect all of us together at that awards ceremony. Are there any other resources, Sandra or Ranjana, or announcements that you want to make as we wrap up today?
Well, I'll announce that we're presenting the major findings and trends in the data next week on November 8th, and as part of another webinar that's an international webinar. It's intended for especially journalists who want to hear what the science are, but it's open to everyone. And in contrast to this one, which Ranjana and I felt really strongly we wanted to really speak to other frontline communities about how to use the compendium. This one will be more science focused. It'll be me presenting some of the science, but also one of the scientists whose work we feature, who's probably the world's expert on methane cycling and the contribution of fracking to the climate crisis, Dr. Robert Howarth, is also presenting. Dr. Ted Shetler, my colleague at the Science and Environmental Health Network, who is a physician and an occupational health specialist, is presenting on some of the health data, as is one of the other co-founders of Concerned Health Professionals of New York, pediatrician Kathy Nolan, who's presenting on the infant and pregnancy stuff. And so it's a kind of an all-star lineup on November 8th, and I'm hoping somebody can throw that in the chat so that anyone who wasn't able to attend this, who wants to really hear the nitty-gritty of some of the findings, we're holding it like we did this one in the afternoon, so that people all the way to California to South Africa and Europe and everywhere can attend, and it won't be like 3 a.m. or something. So that is week from now, November 8th.
Great. And that gives us all a chance to spread the news about that webinar.
Yes, please
as well.
do.
So yeah, let's all mobilize and get the word out so that more people can learn about it.
Ranjana, it's always such an honor to work with you. the heroism and also just the strategy that you all bring in your fight in Arlington is amazing to me. And I think of you often as I, am pouring through all the data, trying to figure out how to compile this and write about it, and what it means to communities like yours. So thank you for what you do.
Thanks, Sandra. We appreciate you as well. And, what we do is an act of optimism and hope.
Exactly. And we're moms. So what
Yes,
choice do we have?
exactly.
It's our job to keep our children safe from harm and make sure they have a future, right? So we can't stop doing this.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Take care.